Welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran, and I am joined today by a good friend of mine, special guest who has a background in filmmaking and just the arts in general, writing and anything around media, basically. She's kind of had her hands in. So it's my good friend, Marguerite Wasinski. Marguerite, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being so accommodating to come and talk on my silly little podcast. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm
Thank you so much
fantastic.
for no, thank you for having me. I'm always happy to jump on and just talk. Love talking about important things and dumb things and everything in between.
Yeah. Mostly dumb is what you hear on here, but today I feel like we're kind of breaking the mold. So, of course, the Super Bowl happened this past weekend, and and I was thinking about it. I didn't find the game super interesting. It was a blowout. It was a matchup, between Philadelphia and Kansas City that a lot of people were kind of over. Marguerite is based in the Detroit area, so obviously go Lions there, right? But what I
Oh
wanted
yeah.
to talk about, yeah, right, sure, maybe next year. But what I wanted to talk about, honestly, is the halftime show, and because there was really a lot to unpack in this halftime show, and that's why I wanted Marguerite on, is to really kind of break that down from a creative perspective as somebody who has been around choreography and what goes into that. And myself, I love Kendrick Lamar, I love rap music, so kind of wanted to have a conversation about it and just talk kind of high level, far reaching about what this halftime show meant and what all of the commentary around it has been ever since then. So, just kind of first, before we start on any of the like deep dive topics here, did you like the halftime show?
Yes, I did. So I am one of many Americans that don't have cable. So my
Mhm.
entrance to the halftime show was a little delayed. I kind of watched like all of the highlights, and I watched of the Super Bowl, and then I watched the halftime show as a whole, not live. So I will preface that I did not watch it live. However, I did watch it as a whole afterwards, and I loved it. But we can kind of go into the details of why. Mostly, I'll say I'm used to seeing the usual things. We're all used to seeing the usual things at the halftime show. It's bombastic. It's got flat fireworks. It's got all these dance numbers and guest stars, and it's big, it's flashy, right? It's very America. But um the way that Kendrick I was like immediately glued in and zeroed in on it because it wasn't it was, but it wasn't. It was very Kendrick Lamar, like he said, like it's the right the wrong I love that quote, the right time, wrong guy. And to have a rapper at this in this day and age headline the Super Bowl, I thought was a very interesting choice. I really liked that. But we can keep going into that in more details as we go on.
So, the current United States Donald Trump has really injected himself, I feel like, into the conversation around the Super Bowl. And he became the first ever sitting president to attend a Super Bowl, which, on the surface, you might not think, oh, yeah, who cares? But when you consider the tax dollars that goes into Secret Service being there, just the flight arrangements to get him there safely, when you talk about the president of a nation, you have to take the necessary security precautions. So, and then with him being in attendance, you had all of the questions for the players. There's like, anybody that's been around to watch Super Bowls over the years knows that week in between the Super Bowl and the Pro Bowl is just kind of like you're just begging, trying to find something to ask these players. So there was something newsworthy, so they asked them about it, right? So,
Yeah.
what did you make of his decision to be at the game in the first place?
I mean, a lot of what a lot it's hard to say because with Trump, as you and I were discussing a little beforehand, he will never it's hard for him to get a straight answer out of him, it seems. And a lot of times it feels a little performative. But as much as I like to say it's performative, there's always a reason behind it and what he does. And part of me just wants to say, He just did it because he wanted to go to the football game. Part of me wants to say he did it to stir things up, to, you know, make his presence known, um to anger, or to, you know, to make sure that, you know, he's in the forefront of everyone's mind. So it's really hard. It's really hard to say, but what I really don't like is that the attention is always around him, and he knows
Yeah.
that. And is that a fault of ours or everyone else's? That again, everyone was questioned about it, and everyone, you know, we just couldn't ignore it, because you can't just ignore something like that. And to me, it feels like it's a mess all around. It's a media circus, no matter what.
You know, and him kind of making himself in as part of the proceedings, I think also brought about, like, people were kind of annoyed at this matchup, and they were just kind of like, hey, well, now I don't even want to watch. You know, a lot of people were talking about boycotting because he was going to be there. But in the way that the Eagles players answered the questions, which was basically no comment, you know, it is what it is kind of commentary, whereas like the couple of Chiefs players were like, oh, it's an honor to play in front of the president. You know, it kind of gave people rooting interest, which I think is kind of like a weird byproduct. But I say all that to say that he kind of set the preface that this was going to be a political event throughout the game, right? Where a lot of people, his supporters, were, you know, really excited about the Chiefs now because, you know, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce said it was going to be an honor to play in front of him. And then you have the Eagles, on the other hand, they're led by, you know, a quarterback who is, you know, very forward about his blackness, and, you know, has a all woman management team. So when you have the anti DEI president, that kind of runs in the face of that, right? And we'll get to that aspect later. But I think that was kind of the tone, right, of the game as you were going into it because of the Trump element. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, I absolutely agree. And it's kind of funny when you say it like that. It reminds me of all the times that um, mostly people who would align themselves with Trump would then get mad at many of people on the other side. It's like, how dare you make things political? How dare you make things political? How dare you make things political? And here you have someone who seemingly those people have historically aligned with and are currently aligned with, making something very political, like you said. So as soon as you say that, you know, the hypocrisy just kind of flares in my mind. And at the end of the day, almost everything is political nowadays, whether you can
Right.
escape it or not, for better or worse. That's just how
Oh
it is.
yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And then so that happens, the national anthem happens, he's got his salute going instead of the arm on the heart thing, whatever. I'm not gonna I'm gonna stop talking about that because I have very long-winded opinions about whether we should be playing the national anthem at sporting events. But
Mm-hmm.
we'll kind of fast forward to halftime. So it's the halftime show, and who do we see? We see Samuel L. Jackson. And which was great because, you know, he's dressed up like Uncle Sam. His name is Sam, you know, so it felt like a natural thing. But it feels like there was more to it than just that. So, from a creative direction perspective, you know, you have the figure of Uncle Sam, right? Who's traditionally this white guy with a goatee, beard, whatever. And then you have it as this pillar of like black cinema historically, right? Who's been like, if you were to ask people, name 5 black actors, he's up there, right? He's probably one of the first names being mentioned. So to
Oh
you,
yeah.
what was the significance of Sam Jackson playing Uncle Sam in the context of this show?
So immediately, as it did to many people, I thought of Django Unchained, and honestly, that's exactly where my mind went. Even with the way that he was speaking, and what Uncle Sam stands for. So obviously, Uncle Sam has become. I mean, it kind of started as what, for the IRS or something, like IRS is coming for you, and then it went on to meaning, you know, the military wants you, and, like, you know, very America propaganda, and that's kind of how Uncle Sam has been boiled down to today. So to see a black man, Samuel L. Jackson, in very black films, like you said, as a public government American figure who is for America, who's trying to recruit America and into drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, reminded me of how his character almost kind of in Django Unchained, who also works against his own blackness in that movie, in the best interests of Black people at that time. And it seemed that Samuel Jackson's role as Uncle Sam here was kind of doing the same thing, where he was trying to orchestrate. And I thought, again, I didn't know at first when I saw him what his role was going to be, but you could kind of get the idea that there was something tongue-in-cheek happening. And that in my mind, I was like, oh, this is going to be very tongue-in-cheek, very satirical. And it was. Obviously, Samuel Jackson was there as a kind of way to orchestrate, to teach, to help, teach Kendrick how to mold into society in a way that's more digestible, right? A more digestible Black man for society. That's what Samuel Jackson's Uncle Sam was there for, to make sure he knew not to go too far, and kind of stay within the realms of being able to be accepted by the white society or by America in general. So it just kind of reminded me a lot of that significance. So I think that was a direct callback when I saw Samuel Jackson, that casting for that, for sure.
It reminded me of, I used to work with this guy named Robert, and Robert's Black man. And I would get into these conversations where America kind of wants you to have this distilled image of your Blackness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they want you to, like, if you have any inflection of ebonics or an accent of some sort, it's like, well, you need to talk properly or whatever the case may be. And there have been Black celebrities and stuff that have challenged that notion over the years, which I've always been a big fan of. And it felt like his whole presence there was this big kind of metaphor for, he is the system, and he's kind of becoming like, this is what a Black person should act like. And especially when you talk about somebody like Kendrick Lamar, a guy who grew up in Compton, who makes rap music that a lot of, mainstream white America doesn't really align with, and you think about, again, in the context of where he's like, no, do it like this or do it like that, where he's like, well, you just have to make it palatable, digestible, which to me felt like another way to say, they don't want you to have difficult conversations. Because if you listen to some of the music that Kendrick has put out, Kendrick's a very political rapper. Like,
yeah.
It's he's a lot of, there's like this notion about rappers that there's just all like drug music, party music, whatever, and he's not really that. Like, they thought about, like, when he first came on the scene, his swimming pool song, which is about drinking or whatever. But even that song, has more depth to it than a lot of people give him credit for. And I just felt like Uncle Sam, Samuel Jackson, there was just kind of like this character of the reminder of what white America wants Black America to be. And I just thought that was like just really pointed commentary that really hit me. Like you said, might not have hit me right away, but it hit me a little bit after you digested the performance and maybe even watched it a couple times over.
Absolutely. Even exactly. Like, I think the point where it really hit me was further along when he was, I'm terrible memory and I forget, so I'm paraphrasing, when he was telling one of the times he was telling him to dial it back, and that's when SZA came on, and that's when it started getting poppy, and that's when they started playing music that everyone knew and the crowd was in, and it started getting very, okay, so obviously Kendrick knew. He's like, okay, that was quote unquote too hood, is what Samuel Jackson was saying. Time to play what the people really want. And so that's when those what people come to expect, so to speak, what people expect, what people are happy with and comfortable with, the middle white America, like you say, and that's when the performance completely changed. And so I realized exactly that it's what he was going for. And especially with his commentary between him and his dancers, the women that were around him. Of course, the part that I've played the most on repeat is when he goes, should I? Again, I don't know how much we should probably stay on topic, not divulge too much into the whole Drake aspect of it. But even with this commentary going back and forth with it, I mean, it has to do with what Kendrick wants to do as an artist and his whole thing, like where he was very outspoken, or people have been outspoken about Kendrick, you shouldn't play that. Kendrick, you shouldn't do this. I'm sure he's been told that about his blackness his entire life and throughout his entire career as well. And look at Drake. I can't help but bring him up. Drake is more quote unquote digestible, in my opinion. If we were going to get there, he is more poppy. He's topped the charts. Like, he's been the biggest artist, the biggest for years and years and years. There's no contest. And just look at the kind of music that they both have made. So I think that also had to do with what Kendrick was so frustrated about. And I think that paralleled his frustration with Drake and the industry as a whole, and what Drake stands for, it also paralleled into his performance.
And that's like another layer, right? Because like a lot of people over the years have called Drake a culture vulture and have really criticized what he does and how he has gotten his fame. And in a weird sense, bringing it back to the Samuel L. Jackson Django Unchained thing, you know, it kind of feels like that sort of a thing where Drake is what Samuel L. Jackson's character was. It's like, this is what you're supposed to be like him. You know, he makes sing-songy love songs that people love to play on Apple Music or whatever, right? And
Yep.
and Kendrick's like, actually, no, I'm going to, you know, really show the artistry here and give you a complex subject matter that you may not understand, but it's okay.
Yep.
And in you know, in the past, we've respected that artistry, and it feels like with rappers, sometimes mainstream rappers, I should say, that kind of goes out the window, right? Where it's just kind of like, just make me dance, man. Talk about selling some coke, you know. It's just
Yeah.
like, and it's he has again, like his To Pimp a Butterfly album is a good example of that. It's not a, oh, this song came on shuffle, I have to listen to it. It's more, I have to listen to this guy's album intently
Yep.
because there's double and triple entendres and there's metaphors and symbolism that you might not get if you're just shuffling a playlist on Spotify or something, right?
Yep.
I want to talk about his dancers though. So is one of the things that was pointed out immediately. He has dancers coming on dressed in red, white, and blue, right? Which you could take that. A lot of people took that to mean as a Bloods and Crips thing, with him being from Compton. Obviously, the other parallel is that they created the American flag, and then with him in the middle of it, where it was divided. I mean, what sort of symbolism were you taking with that, considering they were looking like the flag, and also that it was an all-black dancing group, which ironically a lot of people had a problem with, you know. But well, I guess, what did you take from that creative decision?
So that was my favorite part of the entire. I'm excited to talk about this. It's my favorite part of the entire show, because I loved it. Because Kendrick, I'm going to say this colloquially, he is very petty, and the pettiness comes power, and he's petty for a good reason. When I say he's petty, I mean that he is petty for all the right reasons. And like, my pettiness, maybe I'm just projecting my own pettiness onto it, but to see black men dressed and organized as the American flag, I think is an image that potentially and obviously did make people very uncomfortable. Because right now, and it made me even feel more comfortable with accepting the American flag, because right now I see the American flag and it honestly, it makes you cringe. It makes me, I don't know a lot of people. Well, I do know a lot of people, but I don't know a lot of people in my, like, tight circle who sees an American flag and doesn't cringe. It feels like a symbol of racism at this point. It has, for a lot of people, elevated to that point. It's not, but it reminds people of racism. And I mean, you can argue that it's not, or it is, but in any case, to then use that to dress and to form it as black men and black people, I thought was very powerful, in a way to almost take that image back, to say this country is for everyone, and I'm gonna make sure that you see it visually, that America is made up of Black people as well. So literally made up of Black people, and taking that power back and seeing the image of Black people with the American flag, I think was like such a powerful thing to happen right now. To bring something together almost as a way to take it back. But it wasn't, like you said, an American flag that we're familiar with seeing. It was broken up, it was played with, it was messed with, it was, you know, it was almost a take on it. So it wasn't the full picture. And I think that was intentional too. It was never meant, he didn't flash an American flag on the screen. He could have made an American flag show up, but he didn't. He made it out of his dancers on purpose. So it was almost like a semblance of the American flag, or a version of maybe as Kendrick sees it, or as he really sees it, or wishes it could be through the lens of a Black man. I'm not sure, but I thought it was amazing.
Another thing too, you could look at it as is, you know, when you incorporate how this country was built. And this country was built off of slave labor for its first 100 years. And well, almost 100 years, but 100 years, say. And it's kind of like a reflection of that, where it's like, hey, this is what this country is built. Because you're right, he could have very easily just had some giant flag, and it could have been a backdrop, or somebody could have carried it out like they've done in other halftime shows. But his, to me, it really struck home a message like that Black people helped to build this country, and as you see it kind of fraying and moving, and you say, yeah, you are discounting us, and this is what happens to this country, to this flag. It was especially powerful to me because the flag, in a way, you kind of mentioned this, has been weaponized by this extreme fringe in the U.S. that we have right now, where you're going to put the American flag on everything, and everything is talked about. This is what America is. Like, I have friends who are in Europe, and they kind of are kind of like, hey, man, our perception of you guys is not good right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, yeah, and that's part of like the weaponization of the flag. Speaking on the fact that it was an all Black dance team there. No, let's not forget that Serena Williams was there as well, crip walking, which,
of course,
the nod to California, LA, and Compton culture, I think, is going a little underreported here because of all the other layers to this. But I do think that is something special that deserves acknowledgement.
Yeah,
but in this current climate, we've had companies roll back DEI initiatives. We've had, basically, like, they're trying to say, like, well, we've moved past racism, right? It's kind of like the talking point that a lot of people are having. And you've seen, like, big companies like Target, for example, has rolled back its initiatives. Others have doubled down, like Costco, right? And so it's like, with the context, you have this president who's kind of the anti-DEI president in attendance. And then you have Kendrick, who goes out there and says, you know what? I'm going to give you the blackest performance I could think of making. I mean, do you think that was his thought process, or was that just, hey, I want to have my people on stage, or maybe it was a mix of both?
To be honest, just because I'm not going to pretend to be the biggest Kendrick Lamar fan, but I have watched his career. I've been a fan, a casual fan, and that's just how Kendrick has been his entire career. And I think that he is standing on business, so to speak. And I do think that it's both, because now, like, I was thinking about this earlier, actually. So thinking about how he had to work with and think about other Black artists, who have had to work with headlining the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is the most American thing ever. Like, arguably it's our thing. And not either, we can't, we don't have to share it with any other country. So it's our thing, and it's very important to portray America, right? And at the Super Bowl halftime show. And I think of other Black artists, I mean, even Rihanna or The Weeknd and other ones have done it recently. and how differently it was done from Kendrick. I think it's the product of the time. Everything 2 + 2 = 4. Everything adds up perfectly, and I think it's the product of the time right now to lean into the blackness extra hard. Um, because of the DIA initiatives being taken away, and I also think that it's Kendrick and how Kendrick has always been stood true and held fast to who he is as a Black man, and bringing his culture and his people and everyone up with him, bringing them up as well. So I think it was absolutely both, because um, I think of all the hoops and the layers. I want to know what the discussion was when he was talking to the Super Bowl producers, because like you said, I've worked with live events and things on this level. I wonder what the creative team and the Super Bowl producers, I wonder what that conversation was like, because I know that he had to have done it through this tongue-in-cheek way to make it more digestible overall. He had to have Samuel Jackson, the Uncle Sam. He had to have that, because to be able to pull this off like he did, I'm sure he wanted to go hard, like way harder, way harder. But to pull it off like he did, he probably had to get reeled back because of those people in attendance, that he wanted to go harder. But I think I think it's a mixture of both, absolutely. So I just wish I could have been a fly on the wall for all of his ideas that he wanted to do, because I'm sure he had tons. And finally, I'm happy that they let him do what he did. Period.
Yeah, I think something that goes a little maybe unnoticed right now is the fact that you have to understand who's airing your performance, right?
Hmm.
At the end of the day, this is, the Super Bowl rights are held by Fox. And obviously, you could separate Fox Sports from Fox News if you want, but it's still the same company. So, the people who are watching, and you think about the NFL's core demographic, it's mostly white guys who are in their 20s to 50s. That 20 to 50 white guy range is their bread and butter. So those
Hmm.
people are going to be watching. So I feel like you almost have to have it veiled like that. But I think with somebody like Kendrick, he's like, all right, I'm seeing what's going on in this country, and it's almost like I know the surface level thing I could do is have somebody like SZA there to do a shot at Drake. But what can I do underneath?
Hmm.
And I think this has been a part of hip hop and rap culture really since the beginning. It's always been about a little bit of a counterculture,
Hmm.
kind of going up against the grain in a certain way of thinking about it. And Kendrick embodies that. He's not a easily palatable, digestible type of artist like when they brought on Katy Perry or something like that. Just like a
Hmm.
pop singer, right? He's a complex artist and a complex guy who has complex thoughts. So he's gonna want to. He's saying, "Here I have millions of people are going to be watching this from home. How do I do something that's going to resonate without getting my mic cut off?" You know,
Hmm. Yep.
and
Yep.
and I think he did that really well. And he did little things about like about revolution. You saw some of like the almost like it looked like I saw like a couple Black Power fists
Hmm.
from the dancers as well, which harkens back to the Olympics back in the '60s. And I'm kind of curious, is there anything from a performance standpoint that really stood out to you that made this performance so special? Because the performance is kind of polarizing, right? You've had some people who said, people like us who really enjoyed it, but you have other people who said that they hated it. So, from your viewpoint and having been a part of these types of events over the years, what kind of stood out to you as you were watching it?
Yeah, so this is what I was kind of getting at the very beginning of this conversation. So when I saw it, I I initially, every year, I can't tell you how many times you could probably agree with this. How many times you hear every year, oh, that was boring. That Super Bowl
Mhm.
performance was boring. Seems like everyone is boring nowadays to everyone. And to me, I think it's because we come to expect the same things, and no shade to the other, performers, but they do what they got to do. They have the triumph, like massive sets and like the theatrics and like, oh my gosh, I loved Rihanna's. First of all, loved the performance last year. But then I think about, I don't want to be too controversial with who I did and didn't like, so I will leave out names. But then I think of other performances that are just like, okay, yeah, there's the rah, there's a big sets, there's a fireworks, there's this, there's that. We've seen it all before. And so instantly when I saw Kendrick Lamar's, it was so toned down and it felt so purposeful and meticulous and calculated. It drew me in instantly, and so it was way different than what I was expecting a Super Bowl performance to be. And so on a performance level, toning it down, forcing people to watch, like, I don't think anyone has ever picked apart a Super Bowl performance like this before, and I think it's because there was something to pick apart. He gave us things to think about and things to look at and criticize. And so from that standpoint of a performance, you know, some people say, oh, I didn't know the lore of Drake. I didn't know the lore of, you know, I didn't grow up in Compton. I don't know about Crips. I don't know about, you know, I don't know about all this and Crip walking and Serena. And I educated myself on some of it. I've known a lot of it just because I'm really interested in hip hop culture in general. But I still had to educate myself on a lot of it. And even with what I didn't know while watching, the message was still clear that while he was able to convey complex things and very simply, like you could tell like the message, even if not knowing all the little details until later on, I understood what he was trying to say with the American flag visuals and with the Uncle Sam visuals and telling him, you know, you got to make it like this. You got, you know, I still understood. And I think that I don't think people were ready to watch something like that. And I think that's why it was brilliant from a performance standpoint. You know, you give someone something they don't expect, they're going to talk about it, they're going to think about it, they might not like it, but that's why I think that I thought it was very, very clever. And rather than going the total digestible a route, just turn it on its head and say, this is what you want me to do, but this is what I'm gonna do, kind of thing.
Now, I think that a big part of this is obviously the political climate we're living in right now. I guess pretend we're in an alternate universe and there's a different person as president of this country. And do you think he goes that far and tries to go out of his way to make a statement if that election in November went a different way?
Oof, that's a good question. I think that yes, because the symbolism I think might have been different, but I think he would have, only because if it wasn't Trump or that election, it would have been something else. I do believe that it was always something. It's always going to be something, unfortunately. I mean, you can name every movement in the past decades, since the civil rights, you know, the movement. There's been so many Black men and women to you know, go to protest for, who have been wrongfully, you know, killed. And I do think would have been something else, to because I think that's what his music's been about. A lot of his music has been about from the beginning. So unfortunately, I do think that it kind of always would have had similar messaging, but not everything might be not as passionate for some of the things, you know.
Yeah, and I think another factor is, consider that it was in New Orleans, you know, a very black
Mhm.
city. You know, maybe, you know, and I think that adds to wanting to make a message about just like being black in America. Because
Mhm.
if they're doing it in Phoenix or something, you know, maybe maybe not as
Yeah.
much. But when you're in a city like New Orleans, if they're in Atlanta or something like that, you know, then that would have made a lot of sense. Um, while we've been talking here for a bit, that the messaging was there, the symbolism was there. There's another sentiment that why couldn't it have been more direct? And I joked that, hey, maybe he'll bring out YG, who had a "Fuck Donald Trump" song made back in 2016. They're both from Compton. There's an argument, right? They've done songs together. Yeah, but obviously he didn't do that. And do you think that maybe this would have resonated more with people that were so unfamiliar with Kendrick's music, that they could have seen this big in your face kind of, we need a change in the way this country is operating right now? Do you think that there was an opportunity missed there, or was the way he did it good enough?
So I often see both sides of this argument. It's difficult because I think to myself, I really want that in your face. I want that, like, if what we're dealing with is so aggressively, racism is such an aggressive, nasty, terrible thing. So shouldn't we, at one point, do we just like lie over and be nice about our messaging back? Or at one point, do we meet that aggression back, at least with passion, more than aggression, and kind of be direct with our messaging? And so I go back and forth on that, because I would love it to be just as direct and just as pointed and combative. And then on the other side of things, that I think that, for a lot of reasons, I do think it had to be palatable like this because of his pushback. Who knows? He might have wanted to do that. We don't know. He might have had plans to do that, because again, I think from the producer's standpoint of what they are and aren't going to allow, maybe this was all he could get away with. Maybe, but at the same time, this kind of messaging wrapped in these layers, as much as I would like to think that people are really going to think about it and maybe it could change some minds, I do think I do end up siding on that side of the fence more often than not, that if you end up meeting people halfway, sometimes that's where the actual conversation can happen, like we are seeing right now. Lots of conversation happening, breaking it down, talking about it. I do end up siding on that side of the fence rather than being so direct, making something that only almost meets people halfway, extending an olive branch, so to speak, and say, okay, I'll play your game. I'm also going to say my shit at the same time.
Right.
So it's tough. It's tough to say. But I do think that, especially with the nature of the Super Bowl, that maybe there are more times he could be more direct, and maybe he just couldn't at this point.
It kind of reminds me of the whole Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X thing, right? While Martin Luther King Jr. was very kind of outspoken and stuff, sadly, his legacy by mainstream America has been watered down significantly. As whereas Malcolm X is kind of viewed as this total out of left field, sort of too extreme, too angry, too violent, right? And I think that that's kind of the thing where maybe taking the MLK approach, which is kind of a little bit more diplomatic, while still vocal, versus the F you, forget this, tear it all down Malcolm X approach. Not to say neither is wrong, but I think when you talk about having somebody to have the conversation in the middle or somewhere close to the middle, I think that's probably the thought process. And you mentioned, you can only get away with so much, and it's just like, it becomes a thing. It's like, all right, how far can I push this line? And, like, I think about just like work I do, which is a totally different thing, but it's like, all right, how can I phrase this in a way where I could still make my point without the world being set on fire, right? And it kind of feels like to me that's what was at play here, because you talk about something as big as a Super Bowl. This isn't like he's performing at a show in LA or something like that. This is, one of the most mainstream, most Americana type
Mhm.
events, as you mentioned earlier, that we have. So
Mhm.
there's going to be some restraint there. With that said, uh, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of Black creators on like TikTok and Instagram and stuff. They're doing deep dive breakdowns of what was being said and the messages. That doesn't go unnoticed. You talk about like hundreds of thousands and millions of likes and views. And I think the Super Bowl is always kind of iffy about having a rapper there. Do you think this performance is going to make them think twice before booking a rapper again?
I sure hope not. But on a real level, um, it depends because what we've learned from the media and what I've learned from the media is that views over everything.
Hmm.
Everything. Views, they will sell their soul for views. Um, and I'm sure that was the main reason why they ended up saying, I don't know if you've probably heard there's a back and forth on like Kendrick playing Not Like Us at the Super Bowl, and I know for a fact they're like, please. I almost think that I can't imagine anyone would tell him not to because the network would eat that up. That's views on views on views on views playing that because capitalizing off of the um the feud right now between
Hmm.
Drake and Kendrick. So knowing that, I think if there's views to be had, I think if they're popular enough, they will. I don't think this will dissuade them because as long as, I mean, even as Kendrick's performance pointed out, they'll use Black culture for views. They'll use Black culture for money, even if it's just those evil evil reasons or like non-moralistic or non-ethical reasons to put rappers or Black rappers on headlining the Super Bowl. They'll do it as long as there's money and views. So I don't think this would dissuade them. No. The messaging, I think, as all will go right over everyone's heads. Or it'll just go in one ear, out the other, and they'll just like, there's just, that's Black America again. They're just gonna do their messaging and
Hmm.
they're gonna keep going as, the people who will care and take note, and the people who don't. So that's just kind of how it's always gonna be, I think.
Yeah, I think the views point's a good one, and you see like the official NFL page, ESPN's pages. They're like they focus in on the Drake piece, right? Like the obviously the viral thing is when he goes to say when he says say Drake and he has like this biggest
Mhm.
grin on his face. That's become
Mhm.
the moment, right? And they've eaten that up, and the whole like the A minor thing, like these are things that this isn't just some random TikToker posting. This is somebody that, that's owned by Disney and ESPN. They're condoning posting this because, like you said, your values might be your values, but at the end of the day, a million, 10 million, 100 million views is what they want, because
Yeah.
that's what's going to drive profitability in the social media age.
Yep.
Uh, so, I guess to wrap it all up, would you say from the Super Bowl halftime shows that you've seen, has this been one of the better ones, or and like how does it rank for you? I feel like most people of a certain age will have the Prince one extremely
Yeah.
high, right? So I think that that's kind of still probably the gold standard. A lot of people mentioned that Dr. Dre one with that, which had all the rappers and stuff.
Loved
Uh,
that one.
that was
Yeah.
a really good one. Rihanna had a really good show last year.
Rihanna was
I
good.
guess where would you kind of do? Is this in the
I
upper echelon, middle, or towards the bottom?
So because it was more than just entertainment for me, it was more than just sit back, popcorn eating, which is fine. That's great.
Mhm.
I love just sitting back, turning my mind off and being entertained. Since this one was a little bit more than just turn your brain off, uh it that's I will always lean towards that's more interesting to me. So I would rank this
Yeah.
really high. I haven't sat or marinated with it enough to say, oh man, it's my favorite, but it's up there for sure. Also up there was, yeah, when 50 Cent, Dr. Dre, all of them. That was incredible. I really liked Rihanna's, like I said, I can't say that enough. That one was great. Honestly, and then The Weeknd and all the other ones are kind of. I know there was Lady. What? Who? No, there was for. What? Who was that? It was J Lo and Fergie. No, J Lo and Shakira. Who
Shakira,
was
yeah.
that? Yeah, it was J Lo
Let's
and
go with
Shakira.
Shakira.
See, I'm forgetting. That's the thing. Most of them to me are forgettable. The only
Mm.
ones that are standing out to me right now, maybe that says something, are um yeah, Dr. Dre, The Weeknd. I really like The Weeknd's, even though I do think that it was a bit of a snooze fest on some of it. Admittedly, that's the one beforehand where I was like, I don't want to get any haters. But no offense, I love The Weeknd, but I do think it was a bit of a snooze fest for what I think he could have done. Because I think he's amazing. I don't want to get into it, but uh those are the ones that I'm really thinking of. I can't think of any. And then like Katy Perry, just because it was Katy Perry, and of course it was silly goofy. Those are the ones I can really think of right now at the top of my head. So again, I'm not really like, I've never really been like, oh man, can't wait for the Super Bowl halftime show, because we've just come to expect the same thing over again. Like, it's going to be cool. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be like, I have a friend, a really close friend of mine actually, who works the Super Bowl every year. He is part of the team that is part of the coordination for, rolling out the sets, making sure the talent's where they need to be, everything. He's part of the coordination. He's not there every year. So it's always, he always gets nominated for, what is it, Grammy every year for a reason, or what is it, a Grammy? Yeah, they always get nominated for a reason. It's an incredible feat. But in terms of performance, I think that Kendrick's ranks high for me, just based on the output of like what he gave us was a lot different. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, for me, the bar is always low for the Super Bowl performance. Like I imagine it's going to have the visuals are going to be there, the dancers are going to be there, overall performance. Like, my expectations are always kind of pedestrian, I would say. And in this one, I found it enjoyable. I know some people didn't, but they have their reasons. Not to say that they're good reasons, but they have their reasons. But on that note, Marguerite, thank you for imparting your wisdom on this topic. I was telling you before we recorded that when I thought about doing this, I was like, who'd be really good to talk to about this? It'd be Marguerite. So thank you for joining me. Really appreciate you being so generous with your time. If you all enjoyed the podcast, make sure to check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Until next week, this is the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran, and we will see you then.